Here's the bottom line. North Korea wants to end, and if China wants to end war games with South Korea, then get rid of nuclear weapons, get rid of ballistic missiles, have it be verifiable, and then we won't need war games. There'll be nothing to war game about.
Nearly 2 weeks on, and the Trump-Putin Summit is the gift that keeps on backtracking and flip-flopping and backtracking again. And in Iran, an all-caps POTUS tweet puts the Islamic Republic on DEFCON 280. 280 characters, that is. You can't make this stuff up. Welcome to your GZERO world. I'm Ian Bremmer, here in the West Village of New York City. For your big interview this week, I head down to Washington, D.C. to interview Florida Senator and Poland Springs brand ambassador Marco Rubio. Remember all the water that he was drinking all the time? No? Okay. I'll also be taking your questions on all things geopolitics in office hours. And on puppet regime, Kim Jong-un gets schooled on the court, paging Dennis Rodman. But first, a word from the folks who help us keep the lights on. United States and Russia. Enormous amount of opposition to Trump's big press conference, saying he gave away the store. President Trump backtracked a tiny bit, then took it back, now saying that there wasn't Russian election interference. It was dreamt up by Democrats as an excuse for Clinton's defeat. We still don't know what Trump and Putin discussed exactly in their private one-on-one bilateral lasting over 2 hours. And when I say we, I include members of his own administration that have not been fully briefed on the discussion. So is it possible they talked about Russian hacking or even what they're going to do in the midterms in 2020? Literally, we have no idea. And yet, there's also virtually no change in U.S. policy towards Russia. Trump himself claims he gave up nothing, and in reality, that may well be true, because the United States isn't recognizing Crimea as a part of Russia, isn't stopping its military exercises with NATO in the Baltic states, isn't taking troops out of Germany, isn't even reducing sanctions against the Russian government. In fact, later on this year, if anything, U.S. Congress is likely to increase marginally those sanctions against Russia because members of Congress, including the Republican leadership, so oppose the idea of a reset. But maybe the most important fact is this. Some 66% of Republicans approved of Trump's Helsinki performance with Putin. And despite all the controversy last week, Trump's approval rating rose to 45%, the highest so far of his presidency. If the media is really worried about U.S.-Russia relations, the average American is not. It was 11:24 p.m. on Sunday evening, a quiet time, but in the White House, President Trump tweeted the following to Iranian President Rouhani: "Never ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious." Demented being the word that stands out to me there. Maybe for you, it's a different one. President Rouhani himself had warned the United States that war with Tehran would be the mother of all wars. For some reason, feminism gets aligned with blowing up another country. Seems unfair. We can talk about that later. Iran's response to the tweet, typical of Trump's bullying words. By the way, a fun fact, you can't actually do all caps in Persian. It doesn't really translate, so I'm not sure they got that. National Security Advisor to Trump, John Bolton, reiterated Trump's threats and the president's stance that if Iran does anything at all to the negative, they will pay a price like few countries have ever paid before. For its part, Iran has shown no signs of reneging on the nuclear deal. But Trump has already pulled the United States out, and Washington is preparing to reimpose the punishing sanctions that brought them to the table in the first place. That means that by the end of this year, almost 1 million barrels a day of Iranian crude will be taken off the table, and next year, Iran's economy will be in serious decline. I am more worried that the U.S. is heading towards confrontation with Iran than I ever was with the North Koreans, for a few reasons. First of all, because Obama did the Iran deal, so Trump wants to blow it up. On North Korea, Obama didn't get anything done, so Trump's like, I can make a deal happen. Also with North Korea, President Trump never really had a credible preemptive military strike on the table. In the case of Iran, many around Trump believe that there is a threat here and they're willing to go after the Iranians. Finally, it's the advisors themselves. On North Korea, everyone was trying to restrain Trump. On Iran, there's a lot of people around Trump that say, let's lean into regime change, let's make this much tougher on Iran. We can absolutely cow them into submission. Put all that together, and I fear that U.S.-Iran relations are headed towards escalation and more conflict, not towards a more stable, frozen place. That's enough from me. Now let's hear from you. It's office hours, when I take questions submitted from viewers just like you.
With the rise of democratically elected, undemocratic governments like Poland, Hungary, and Turkey, do you see this improving in the future or spreading further?
Hi, Danny. Yes, what you're talking about is kind of illiberal democracy. You kind of vote them in and suddenly they're more authoritarian-minded. We're absolutely seeing more of that. It's the anti-establishment push. In Turkey, Erdogan was legitimately democratically elected, and his country is more authoritarian as a consequence. Heck, in Venezuela, I mean, the original election of Hugo Chavez was absolutely democratic, and now they've unwound a democratic system, and it's basically authoritarian. I don't see that happening in the United States or in Western Europe or in Japan or in Canada, but in lots of emerging markets and in some of the weaker advanced democracies, authoritarians are increasingly winning at the ballot box. That's your office hours for this week. If you want to ask a question, just submit a short video to submissions@gzeromedia.com. This week I sit down with Senator Marco Rubio from Florida. He was, of course, a U.S. presidential candidate in 2016 and has recently become an advocate for a new reform conservative movement. Today I'll ask him about North Korea, that tricky Trump-Putin relationship, and why he's somewhat soured on free trade. But first, we talk China.
Quote from you, you're concerned about China's all-out effort to change the world order, to displace the United States as the world's most powerful and influential country and make China.
Yeah, that's been their plan for a long time. Now they just admit it. And which is fine if it's competition, because America can compete. But it has to be fair, and it's not. I mean, many of their gains are coming from the forced transfer of technology, obviously old-fashioned corporate espionage, and also heavy protectionism, which we've allowed them to get away with for 20 years under the sort of conventional wisdom that had existed, that when China got richer and more prosperous, they'd become more democratic and they would adhere to these rules of fair play, but that hasn't been the way it's played out. And so you can see basically as it stands out, they want unfettered access, for example, to our markets and to Europe, but on the other hand, they protect their own home industries and do not allow foreign competition to come in. And if in fact they do allow them to come in because they haven't developed enough in those industries, then they force you to joint venture with them, in which they own a majority. They force you to transfer technology. And then once they can do what you can do, they don't need you anymore. So the competition's fine, but it's got to be fair, and right now it is not.
Now, we're talking tough, certainly, about trade with China, as well as with most other countries at this point. Have been talking some tariffs specifically. What do you think we need to do?
Well, it's a great question. I think part of it is going to have to be, unfortunately, the threat of tariffs. But I don't want to just focus on tariffs, because a lot of these tariffs are on legacy industries, which are important. But if you look at what China's focused on under Made in China 2020, they are focused on, or Made in China 2025, they are focused on the industries of the future: biomedicine, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, telecommunications, aerospace. Those are the industries that are going to drive future economic growth, and those are the ones they seek to establish dominance. And those are the ones that our policy should be focused on. And I've offered a bill, a law that prohibits, for example, the forced transfer of key technologies. Prohibits American companies from doing it, denies access to Chinese companies to our own market. In many ways, it's a small, the ZTE fight is a small part of a bigger fight.
The Chinese telecom firm.
Right, to take that on. But ultimately, I mean, that's really what we should be focused on in this rebalancing. And it's difficult because China knows how to play our system. They know there are American companies who want to have good quarterly returns. To have good quarterly returns, they want access to the 1.4 billion people market that China represents. And they know that they can go to these companies and tell them, if you support these tough U.S. policies, you're going to have a tough time in China. But if you go to Washington and you advocate against these things, then we'll speak well of you and you'll have a very positive environment.
Now, you've been reasonably positive about the American outreach to Kim Jong-un, and we've now had a summit.
So I think we have to have some common sense here, okay? Kim Jong-un has nuclear weapons. Some estimates 50, 60 nuclear warheads.
At least 30.
An established program of long-range missiles, so they probably have the range to hit the U.S. He's probably not very good at aiming, but he's going to hit something, and it's a nuclear weapon. So the alternative is, we're not going to allow him to have those weapons. You go to war. I think the president has been presented with what that would look like. The massive loss of life would be extraordinary. It's easy to talk about these things, but that's the real world. People would die. And so I give him the benefit of the doubt and the credit in the sense that if there is a way to avoid that scenario, let's pursue it. I'm fine with that. Am I uncomfortable watching this monster, lunatic, evil human being, Kim Jong-un, standing by American flags, shaking the president's hands? Of course, yeah, it makes me uncomfortable, but I understand what the president is trying to do. At the end of the day, none of this is going to matter. It's going to come down to one of two scenarios. Either he will denuclearize and get rid of his missiles in a way that's verifiable and permanent, or he doesn't. That's it. How we get there is probably going to be a roller coaster ride. Anything short of that is an unacceptable deal. Now, within the confines of that pathway, we have to be concerned about him, for example, seeking to elongate this. I mean, if I were Kim Jong-un, I think what he's going to do, and what China's probably encouraging him to do, is drag this thing out, turn it into a series of reciprocal concessions on both sides, and ultimately, maybe never do anything that's permanent on the nuclear weapons. But, for example, I would venture to guess that one of the things he probably will want to say is, well, we won't make any more weapons. Or we'll agree to get rid of our weapons, but the inspection system won't be robust. But you've got to get troops out. You've got to get rid of the THAAD missile defense system, which China wants us to get out of there as well. So we've got to be clear about what our goal is and what the only acceptable outcome is, and anything short of that, we should be willing to walk away.
Now, President Trump has made it clear that he'd like to see a way to end these very expensive, provocative military exercises, as he calls them. 32,000 American troops in South Korea. Why do they need to be there? On the one hand, you could say that's facilitating South Koreans' efforts for peace. On the other hand, it's given the store to the Chinese. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't find those war games to be provocative. I find them to be a necessity. You've got a madman with nuclear weapons and missiles and an aggressive sort of past, and you've got to be militarily prepared to confront that, and you've got to exercise those capabilities.
So we should keep the exercises going.
Well, I most certainly think we need to keep our readiness exercises. Mm-hmm. And at some point, the truth is, if he gets rid of his nuclear weapons, here's the bottom line. North Korea wants to end, and if China wants to end war games with South Korea, then get rid of nuclear weapons, get rid of ballistic missiles, have it be verifiable, and then we won't need war games. There'll be nothing to war game about.
One other big issue that gets way too much media play, but I have to ask you about it at least briefly, is the Putin issue, where, Russia, obviously no friend of the United States right now, and yet clearly a lot of desire by the American president to find ways to engage more closely with him. What do you think the Americans should be doing with the Russians presently?
Well, we have to understand what the deal is first. So Vladimir Putin wants Russia to be a global world power again. He doesn't have the economy for that. Okay? It's $2 trillion. He's the size of, Italy and Spain. Great countries, but so Russia's not an economic superpower. Number two is they are not a conventional military superpower, although they have significant conventional military capabilities and they've invested in it. They do have a nuclear arsenal, and they are developing tactical nuclear weapons to use on the battlefield. As part of their military doctrine now is to escalate in order to de-escalate. So that makes them relevant, and that's what gives him his veto vote at the UN Security Council. So he knows that the only way he can be powerful in the world is by asymmetric means and low-cost means that allow him to exert maximum influence at minimal cost. So he doesn't flood Syria with Russian troops. It's not a 500,000 troop presence. It's enough airstrikes to save Assad and wind up with a unified Syria, pro-Russian government, and access to basing rights, including to the Mediterranean. He's now doing the same in Libya. It's the reason why he does these influence campaigns on the West. It didn't cost him a lot of money to do the things they did in 2016, but it makes us talk about him and it makes him influential, and that's how he's trying to finagle his way into somehow being part of the North Korea talks as well. That's what he's trying to do. That's the threat that he poses. And we need to understand it for what it is, and we need to confront it for what it is. And that's what I hope the administration will continue to do. Now, the rhetoric is one thing, the policies are another. So the policy is moving forward. I just think it's important for us to constantly remind all of our policymakers of what Vladimir Putin, the risk and the threat he poses, but ultimately what his goal is. He wants to be an indispensable global leader, and the only way he can do that is by creating problems that force people to deal with him. And that's, it'll be interesting to watch what happens in Syria, because he is trying to get closer to Israel, and he is probably trying to get Iran out of southwest Syria, because that's what makes Israel uncomfortable. And the Iranians are pushing back and saying, okay, thank you for your help. You're not needed here anymore. ISIS is gone, and we'll take it from here.
Have the troops on the ground.
Right, and so there'll be a little bit of a friction there between, and I'm not sure that Russia has the influence over Syria or Iran for that matter. I think if Syria had to choose, or Assad had to choose, he would side with the Iranians over the Russians.
They're there longer term.
They're there longer term. There's all sorts of reasons why. And again, it'll be an interesting thing to watch about the limits on Putin's influence.
So let's turn a little closer home. You had said that we couldn't leave the fate of Americans to the free market, because if we do, millions are not going to be able to adapt.
Well, to the free market alone.
Yes.
We have to understand, what is at the core? What is economic policy? What is the goal of economic policy? The goal of economic policy is to create jobs that are dignified, so that people have the dignity of work and the ability to provide for their family. We have lost that perspective. Today, both the left and the right view Americans as consumers. That means happiness is measured by how many things you can buy. And whether you get the money to buy it from a trust fund, a job, or a government check, it doesn't matter. As long as you have the money to buy things, that's how we define happiness. That's not true. There is inherent in all human beings the dignity of work, and our economic policy should be about dignity of work. Now, what creates dignified jobs? Economic growth. And I believe that free enterprise is the best way to create economic growth.
So we're going to get these trust fund kids to actually do something useful?
Well, yeah, I mean, some of them do, and some of them, some of them are consumers. But let me go back to the point of where I think the free market sometimes doesn't. I think where we overreach is when we say, paid family leave, the market will take care of it. It won't take care of it. And it can't take care of it, because, and if it does, it may in 20 or 30 or 40 years. But in the meantime, millions of people are going to be left behind. The same is true with free trade. Yes, it's true. Free trade will create 20 million new jobs, even as it destroys 10, okay? But those 10 that lost their jobs, a lot of them are not going to be the people that fill the 20 new ones. Those are not going to happen simultaneously. It's going to take a while to create the new 20 million jobs. The other ones go away, in some cases, instantaneously. And those 10 million are not machines that you turned off. They are human beings who are part of communities and a part of families. And there's been an insensitivity to it. We treat economics as a laboratory experiment. We're dealing with people, and when that erodes, when you lose the fact that the economy is there to serve people, not people to serve the economy, it creates a chain of societal issues that manifest themselves culturally and manifest themselves politically. And it's not a US phenomenon. You're seeing it in developed economies around the world. And what will be interesting to watch is, and you've written about this, is the impact those trends are going to have on developing countries whose economic growth has been driven by low-wage force. I read this morning about China took a warehouse fully automated, all people out of work. Imagine when that starts hitting Vietnam and other places, and those governments don't have the wherewithal to provide the transition and the buffer.
Yeah, so if you could actually get a couple things done in the United States that you think would really address this, either the governmental or national or at the local and state level,
right,
it would be what?
We have to completely rethink about what higher education means. It's no longer about teaching 18-year-olds to go to college, get 4-year degrees, and get a job somewhere. It's about capacitating people with the skills they need for 21st century jobs, which may or may not be a traditional 4-year degree. And number two, a higher education system capable of retraining people multiple times throughout their lives so that they can quickly adjust. I think that's the first thing that I think we need to absolutely do sooner rather than later.
Is anyone doing this well right now?
Yes, there are pockets. So there's a school district in Southwest Florida that over half their students graduate certified, ready to work in different industries. But we need to be ready because we have to be honest with them. You're 19 years old, you're 20 years old, you're gonna go work somewhere. That job might disappear in a decade. You're gonna have to come back and retrain in something else. We just have to be prepared for that. I think the second thing that we have to do is we have to invest in the institutions like community and family. That's why I'm such a strong supporter of some way to provide options for paid family leave. Because I do think that that's an impediment to families. Having a child should not be an economic crisis-inducing event, but it is for millions of Americans. So those are the kinds of things that but I think the educational piece is the most important. And we have to have economic policies and trade policies and regulatory policies that make America the best place in the world for these cutting-edge industries. In the history of mankind, no nation has been able to go back to the past.
Marco Rubio.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Finally, it's time for Puppet Regime, where North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un gets schooled on the court by some authoritarian bullies.
So, Mr. Kim, what's it like between you and the old Axis of Evil crowd these days?
Well, it's been different. Sup, guys? Sorry I'm late. Can I get in? Hey, what the...
Sup, Kim?
What?
I don't know. Why don't you tell us what? Yes, mister. I am best friends with Great Satan now.
What? Oh, no, you don't understand. It's...
You changed, man.
No, don't you see? It's like,
Tell him how this movie will end. 2 years, Kim. I give it 2 years. And then one day, America will just walk out on you. Death to America!
What? No, Why can't you guys just be happy for me?
Axis of Evil isn't about being happy, Kim. It's about being evil. You're either with us or against us. He's right, man. You have to choose.
Well then, I choose.
That's our show for this week. Next week, come back, we've got David Sanger. He is the national security correspondent and a Pulitzer Prize winner from the New York Times. Fantastic conversation with him. If you like what you've seen, check us out in the meantime on GZEROmedia.com.